Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Chelsea Domenico, and on behalf of Ethisphere and our partners at EVERFI, I'm pleased to welcome you to our webcast, Preserving Cultural Strengths but Preparing for Change, How Data, Measurement, and a New Sense of Safety are a Key Path Forward. We're excited to be partnering with EVERFI, our Global Ethics Summit partner today, on this pressing topic as they're joined by experts at Western Digital and LabCorp to explore both a mix of longstanding challenges and unique drivers of culture that can help explain when and how you analyze culture, apply learnings, and embrace continuous measurements in order to transform. During today's interactive video conversation, I encourage you to hover over the speaker videos and switch them over to toggle view. That way you're able to see all of them at once instead of just speaker view. We also encourage you to ask questions through a question and answer feature in today's discussion. If you've ever joined us for an Ethisphere webcast before, we know we love to take your questions throughout today's presentation, so we encourage you to do so. Following the live webcast, you'll receive an email from me, including today's recording, as well as the presentation materials. For our BELA members, you can access this material on your member hub. If you need assistance with your login to our BELA member hub or would like other members of your team to have access, don't hesitate to reach out to me and let me know. I want to quickly introduce to you our experts today. Moderating today's conversation is my colleague Erica Salmon Byrne, EVP and Chair of BELA here at Ethisphere, as she's joined by Elizabeth Owens-Bill, SVP of Workplace Culture at EVERFI, Tiffany Scurry, VP Legal and Chief Compliance Officer at Western Digital, and Tracy Strong, SVP Compliance and Chief Privacy Officer at Laboratory Corporation of America. I'd like to turn the floor over to Erica. It is all yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Chelsea. I hope that this finds everybody doing well this morning, wherever you happen to be joining us from. And as Chelsea mentioned, we are delighted to be joined by such a terrific panel today. I do strongly encourage you guys to ask us questions. This format, you at least see our faces as we're talking, so it's a little bit less speaking into the ether than some webinars are, but we know that this is a topic that a lot of people have a lot of questions about, and we really want to make sure that we get to as many questions as we can. I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing my speakers. All of them have extensive online presences. I encourage you to check out their work. I'm really delighted to have all of them on the line with me. So Chelsea, if you want to go ahead and move us to the first slide, we will dive right in. So Elizabeth, I wanted to start with you and just cue you up to talk a little bit about the work that EVERFI does, because I think the context here is going to be so important as we move into the material that the group has to cover today. So if you want to just take one moment to just kind of talk a little bit about how you wound up here at EVERFI and what work EVERFI does, that'll set a little bit of context, I think, for everybody else as we move through the slides.
Great, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Erica. And it's great to be here with all of you today and to be partnering with Ethisphere on this webinar. As Erica mentioned, I am with EVERFI. And for those of you who aren't familiar with EVERFI, we are an education technology company. And so we provide digital workplace training, among other kinds of training, that not only helps thousands of companies that we partner with to meet their ethics and compliance obligations, but also to strengthen their workplace cultures. And we really do that, I think, in two ways that sets us apart. One is we have a very strong dedication and focus on data and measurement through our learning courses. So we don't just track things like completion rates or retention of information. We also measure impact and changes in learner attitudes and behaviors so that the company can actually identify additional needs and hotspots to focus their efforts after the training. And we also focus a great deal on prevention, focusing on warning signs and nuanced scenarios and skill building, as opposed to just recognizing violations after the fact. So those are two of the things that brought me to EVERFI. Prior to coming to EVERFI, I was General Counsel and Chief Ethics Officer at SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management. I'm an employment attorney by trade, also did a stint at the EEOC and at a management law firm. So it's great to be here with you today.
Thank you. I think that context is going to be important because we're going to cite to some of your research and other data findings that you've had over the course of the presentation. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do that setup. So, Chelsea, if we go to the next slide, one of the things, for those of you on the phone who have heard us speak about culture data before, you know that we spend a lot of time measuring culture. And in volume 1 of our Culture Insight Series report that we launched at the end of last year, we talked a lot about the delta between people who are hypothetically willing to report observed misconduct and those who actually report observed misconduct. And that's one of the deltas that we are showing on the screen in front of you today, which is, 92% of people, if you ask them the hypothetical question, would you be willing to say something if you saw something? The answer is absolutely, of course. Strongly agree with that statement. And then when you ask the folks who say that they did actually see something, did you say something? You see a pretty significant drop down in people who had the ability and the wherewithal to speak up and say something when they saw something. Of the folks who did say something, 60%, 60+% of them say it to their manager. Now, that's one thing in a normal world, right? Where managers are seeing their direct reports, you're passing people in the hallway, you have a chance to check in a really personal way. Tracy, I want to pull you into this conversation. How do we think about using managers as a channel when managers are working remotely, right? When managers are splitting shifts with the people who report to them, as we think about returning to the office, people aren't seeing each other in the same way that they used to. So, at LabCorp, how are you thinking about it? How do you kind of approach that? What do we do when we're all remote from each other and don't have that interpersonal connection in the same way?
Thanks, Erica, and I appreciate the ability to participate on this panel today. So for those of you who aren't familiar with LabCorp, we're a global life sciences company that is in providing comprehensive clinical laboratory testing as well as end-to-end drug development services. So we are global. Our workforce is varied in varied locations. We're in physician offices, drawing blood, in patient service centers. We have employees that are at investigator sites interacting with patients. We have couriers, we have laboratory technicians, and then other people in typical office settings. So while this is a change to have many of our workforce remote, many of them are still out in the field conducting that work. And their interactions with managers might not be in person on a regular basis anyway, because of the nature of their work. So I think we have been considering how to better engage managers and give them the tools to receive reports and handle reports that they're receiving from their employees prior to the pandemic. And I think some of those tools that we were developing still apply. Our HR and communications teams have been doing a great job of putting out a lot of information for managers for working with their employees remotely and how to engage and manage work. And I think that those tools apply as well on the ethics and compliance front as part of their everyday management. So we just want to make sure that people understand what to do when they receive a report, regardless of how they're receiving it. That being said, we do have a global action line, and we've been trying to put out some more communications about that channel of reporting so that people are aware. And we have seen an uptick in use of that action line since the remote, since more of our employees have been working remotely.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Got a great question from the floor. Thank you all for using the Q&A function. Wondering where some of these numbers are coming from. So I'll take a step back. I had Elizabeth do her context setting piece. Unless I say otherwise, all of the data points we're sharing are from the culture work that we do here at Ethisphere. So we have at this point a data set of north of 660,000 current employee responses. That means an employee who took the culture survey sometime in the course of the last 2 years. And that represents the views of about 4.5 million employees. So if we look at the size of the organizations that we've worked with. So those are all the stats that I'll be citing to for the most part. Elizabeth has some great research that EVERFI has done that we'll be sharing as well. But so if I don't specifically say here's where this particular data point comes from. That's the basis for the data. Chelsea, if we go to the next slide, I want to pick up on something, on a point that Tracy made, which is around sort of the motivating reasons that people are raising concerns. And I'd like to pull both Tracy and Elizabeth into this part of the conversation about how this might be changing now. So we're gonna talk a little bit about fear of retaliation in a moment and what we see from a data perspective on that. But one of the things that I wanted to particularly raise from this slide is for those individual employees who say that they won't report something if they see something, half of them indicate a belief that nothing's going to happen. So sort of why bother? And Elizabeth and Tracy, I'd like to get your thoughts on whether you think that is something that companies need to be thinking about more carefully, that sort of sense of organizational justice in this environment, or if you think that is so pervasive that, you know, it's one of the few things that may not be COVID affected. So Elizabeth, I'll go ahead and start with you. You know, how do you think about that sense of organizational justice and why that may or may not be a motivating factor that's impacted in this current time?
Sure, we've seen that statistic or in that pattern bearing out quite a bit. Fear of retaliation and a belief that nothing will happen as incredible drivers of inaction by employees. And unfortunately, to some extent, these are things that are very much within a company's control to change that perception through proactive action. I know we're going to talk about retaliation in a minute, but the belief that nothing will happen, not only has it been a problem, but I think it's going to be heightened because of social distancing and remote management. There isn't sort of the visual of, oh, that person has been moved to a different department or have experienced some sort of a consequence of a result of a behavior. So I think two things on this front. One thing that I advise employers is on this is, first, check to make sure that this is a perception problem rather than reality. Have you been doing, responding appropriately to complaints as they come in? And if you have, what have you been communicating about the outcomes of those responses or of your investigation? Yeah. Should you be amplifying your transparency around outcomes? And I know Ethisphere has published some really great data about how the world's most ethical companies are really moving the needle on transparency, either sharing information with their employees or even more broadly about outcomes, often in an aggregated, de-identified way.
Right, of course.
Right.
Make all the lawyers out there comfortable. Aggregated, de-identified,
But that kind of transparency can go so far in two things. One is chipping away at this misperception of that nothing will happen. That in turn will prevent people from engaging in misconduct because they know that they will be held accountable for it. Right. And it simultaneously will encourage reporting. So it's really critical to dig into that number and to take action.
Well, and Elizabeth, I really like the fact that you started by saying, make sure that it's a perception issue, not a reality issue. So one of the things that we see sometimes in the data, and you know, I really, when we do see this in the data, when we work with a company, I always feel so much sympathy for the compliance team. And that is when you sort by function on organizational justice, and HR, legal, and finance are the ones that say, nope, the rules aren't the same for everybody. It's like, well, guys, you know, I don't know what to tell you, because if anybody's going to know the rules aren't the same, that's the crew that's going to know it. So yeah, but it's a really important point. Tracy, I got a great question that came in from the floor that I think you're particularly well suited to take on, and that is, how do you approach the issue of incentivizing or encouraging line managers to report up information that they receive from their employees? How do you counteract that instinct to keep it within the team? And yeah, as you're sort of unmuting yourself and thinking about this one of the things that we often see, because we will ask during the course of the survey process, we ask employees who said, yes, I saw something, no, I didn't say something. We will ask them, why didn't you say something? And often the answer is, my manager prefers to keep things within the team. So, you know, I didn't think it was worth speaking up. So how do you think about that challenge, and what advice would you have for the folks on the line on sort of their approach to that piece?
Yeah, I think that is, I mean, it is a difficult challenge to figure out how to incentivize managers. One thing we've been trying to address is sometimes I think managers don't know that they should escalate it. It might not be a sort of a thing that they're trying to hide something in their team, but they think they can handle it on their own, or they think that it's
yeah, I love that one. Oh, I got this.
Yeah.
I don't need any help. Right.
So that's what we've been focused this year on, kind of formalizing what to do next. I mean, putting some policies in place about what things should be escalated, or how to, if you're going to handle an investigation, how to handle that. What are the things you should be doing? And we wanted to try to track reports that are coming in. We don't have a formalized system of reporting those and tracking. I mean, things get reported up to the compliance department or to the HR teams or the legal department, but we don't have a centralized system where we track all of those. So for benchmarking and analysis of how many reports are coming in, we've been trying to figure out ways to kind of centralize that information. And I think that will be helpful for us to then further tailor our efforts to incentivize managers to report that up. We've been trying to give managers some tools to use in their team meetings to try to encourage their own reports, and so like a slide that they can put in, or something they can talk about for 5 minutes at the beginning of a regular meeting about compliance, so that their team sees that they are engaged and think that compliance and ethics are important. So those are just some of the tools that we've been using.
Makes a ton of sense. Elizabeth, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think great points, of course. In what some of the work that we've been seeing at EVERFI is that another reason why people are not reporting, even though they want very much to report and they believe it's the right thing to do, is a lack of confidence that they'll be supported by their peers as well as their manager. So I know we have manager support here on the slide, but research has also shown that the difference maker between people speaking up when they see misconduct or a harmful situation is very often what they think their coworkers would support, and whether that's sort of socially acceptable in your particular working environment. And so one of the tactics you can do to help promote reporting and change that peer norm, if you will, is to publicize the data, particularly what you had on the previous slide about what people say that they would do, that yes, I would report if I saw harm in the workplace. And by doing that, you actually sort of reset the social norm in the workplace of what people want to do and they feel like they should do. And that can actually go a very long way in encouraging people to actually report misconduct when they see it. It's a key factor of bystander intervention techniques is sort of setting the expectation and the shared belief that people should report and that they would be supported in being in reporting.
Right. No, absolutely. Chelsea, if we can go ahead and pop to the next slide. I think this emphasizes some of the points that Tracy and Elizabeth and I have been making. So if we look at, again, this is coming from our data set, if we look at how employees are actually raising concerns. So for the folks who said, yes, I saw something, yes, I said something, the follow-on question is, how did you raise it? And that's the data that you see here, which is my manager, my individual manager being the single most important reporting source, right? Far outstripping the hotline, far outstripping really any other potential tool that you might be using is that direct walk-in piece of it. Followed by human resources, right? Lots of folks have good relationships with their HR business partners, and they will use those folks as another walk-in piece. What my main takeaway from this data always is, especially if it's something where I'm not 100% sure that what I saw is an issue, or I may be a little uncomfortable that my peers, as Elizabeth highlighted, wouldn't support me, I want to go talk to a person. And ideally, I want to talk to a person I know. And so one of the things that we see in the data here as well, and this is a pattern that is continuing even in COVID times, is what we like to call creeping escalation. So I brought something to my manager. Didn't really like how that went. Still feel pretty fired up about it. Took it to my HR partner. Maybe I didn't like how that went. Still pretty fired up about it. And so then finally I call the hotline. And it's only really at the point that I call the hotline that it comes to the attention of somebody like Tracy, who can then really, sort of run it down in the way that we all think of every issue being raised, being addressed. So I wanted to show this data in particular because I think it really reinforces the fact that individual managers are such a critical piece of the compliance puzzle. And even in a remote or weird working environment, they're still a really important piece of the compliance puzzle. Now, one of the questions that we got coming in from the floor, which is a great question, is, are you seeing, and Tracy, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, are you seeing any particular trend in types of reports in the remote working environment? So are you seeing a change in the kinds of things that people are raising, either through managers and HR partners or through the hotline? So Tracy, I don't know if you want to go ahead and take that one on.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely seen more reports regarding safety, working conditions, privacy. I think I took a quick look at our statistics, and about over 50% of the reports that have come in since March have been related to COVID or safety or those kinds of issues. So I think that's what's front and center. I think this time is going to be difficult on the fear of retaliation point, because of the financial situation that many companies are in, and looking at furloughing and other reduced hours and things like that. And employees may be even less inclined to report because they don't want to be seen as raising concerns when they should
troublemakers.
Right. When they need their job. So I think that's something that we're trying to address in communications, and to encourage speaking up, and also to put out a lot of communications about what we're doing from a safety perspective, and around our communications team is really trying to be transparent, because I think transparency helps to calm fears.
Yep, absolutely. Tiffany, I know you've had the mother of all internet challenges this morning, so I think we have your audio now. I'm going to try to bring you into the conversation and just see if we can get your point of view. We're particularly here talking about the changes and trends that we're seeing in employees raising concerns in the current remote working environment.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can. Fantastic. So for everybody on the line, Tiffany has spent most of the morning trying to get her internet working. So we now have her audio, and we are just going to be grateful that we have her voice.
Thank you so much. So we're talking about, I'm sorry, can you say that question again?
Yeah, so we got a great question, the question we knew we were going to get from the floor, right? Which was, what are the trends that we're seeing right now in the types of reports? Are there any changes? Are there constants? Sort of what are, and Tracy just kind of gave her perspective on the spike in safety calls that she's seeing and kind of how they're thinking about that. And I'd love to get your point of view as well.
We're seeing the same thing. Our calls, we're getting less calls now on the types of matters that we traditionally used to see.
Yep.
And we think that some of that is because people are distracted right now by everything that's going on in their lives. So some of that activity has just been disrupted. People are prioritizing different things. The calls went even a little bit on the quiet side for a period of time, and now they're picking up again, but it's not back to the traditional things yet that we typically see. Now it's like Tracy was talking about, it's more on the safety end. And our helpline provider actually early on in all this was sending out notices saying, gosh, on our end, what we're seeing is that companies' hotlines are turning into COVID hotlines.
Mm-hmm.
We're becoming overwhelmed with volume, and is there anything you guys can do out there, the companies, to help us out, remind employees that they have other ways of reporting, because they were getting overwhelmed. But that is indeed what we're seeing at our company. And we've gone out and done even more promotion, actually, to encourage that. We want to know how are people adapting as we have essential workers that are on the site, as we start to think about when's the right time to bring back other workers. These are going to be new norms to have to get used to. These are new rules that we haven't had in place before in terms of social distancing and wearing face coverings. And it's going to take people time to build these habits. And other people are going to be nervous when they see folks on the site who aren't doing these things. And so that's what we have really started to focus on and promote, because I don't think people necessarily think of the ethics helpline as the place that you would report something like that. And maybe employees don't know where you're supposed to report something like that. This is all new to us. And so we've done a lot of work in the last month or so to promote that these are the new rules, and we want everybody to be safe, and let us know, give us suggestions, what's working, what's not working, let us go fix things. And so we've seen a big bump in the helpline reporting on those issues, but we've kind of gone out and asked for it.
Yeah, and Tiffany, one of the things that we talked about during some of the prep conversations for today's dialogue was that you guys, while obviously those kinds of safety issues are not within the purview of your team, to you it was a reflection of the fact that when people call the hotline, they know that something's going to happen, and it was really important to you that people continue to have that perception. So you guys spent a bunch of time chasing things that were not technically your responsibilities. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we're working very closely with HR, who's also receiving a lot of these questions and reports.
Yeah.
So it's a combined effort about going out and tackling issues that are, specific issues that are brought to our attention, as well as just messaging more broadly. HR is one of the voices. I think compliance is, to a lesser degree, one of the voices. And then, of course, we have to work very closely with security and real estate operations. And because it's difficult right now, we don't have a lot of people at the site. So you can't just pick up the phone and have somebody at a certain office location go and check on a report that just came in about, a group of people who aren't wearing their face coverings. So we've just had to get creative about how to do that and really work closely together. And so there are daily meetings, there are crisis management teams that have popped up, and it's really a matter of staying coordinated, organized, and sharing a lot of information, all the reports and data that are coming in.
Yeah. Tracy and Tiffany, I want to stick on this manager piece for a second, because there's a question that came in from the floor, and I think the manager component of it is a piece of the puzzle. So the point that the attendee made was that in spite of the fact that we all have these wonderful policies that assure employees that if you call the hotline, you have the option to remain anonymous, and we all spend a lot of time tracking our anonymity rates and trying to read the tea leaves on what that says about how comfortable employees are or are not speaking up. What do you think is at the root of the distrust of the ability to speak up safely? And how, as compliance professionals, do we really tackle that perception that bad things will happen to me if I come forward, and if I do try to raise something anonymously, people are going to try to figure out who I am. So Elizabeth, I don't know if you want to go ahead and tackle that one first, or if everybody's just going to duck and cover. I have you guys on, I have at least two of you on video, so you can't duck and cover for too long. Do you want to tackle that one first?
I'd be happy to start. I think two things, well, there's a couple of things that could be done. One is, as you mentioned, it's really taking proactive action to demonstrate a commitment to non-retaliation, and also that action will happen.
Yep.
Again, to encourage reporting. Those are the two factors that we mentioned earlier. And a lot of that just comes down to transparency in terms of outcomes of particular cases. And obviously not retaliating either. In terms of anonymity, that one's tough, of course, because, you know, obviously don't go on an investigation trying to figure out the source of things. Make sure you're communicating to managers. Do not try to divine the identity of who may have filed this complaint. But in that case too, perhaps additional transparency about the process may help as well. Perhaps consider doing, this is just off the top of my head, a tutorial or FAQ about how the hotline system works. What does it look like when a complaint comes in? Here's the dashboard that we see, and as you can see, there is no way for us to see the identity of the person who filed the complaint. Here is the process flow of what happens next. By pulling back the curtain a bit on what is otherwise a very behind the scenes process, that can help engender trust in that process. I'd love to hear what Tracy and Tiffany might have to add.
Tracy?
Yeah, I think as far as the root cause for why employees might not want to go to managers, I think it is sort of what Elizabeth was just talking about not knowing what happens after the complaint gets reported, or seeing people that might be more squeaky wheels getting, getting in their own employment trouble and thinking that it's a result of the things that they've reported rather than some other issue. And it's a very difficult, it's hard to figure out how to determine outcomes of investigations, because the investigations or the reports themselves may be confidential to begin with. And, we try not to publicize or to reveal any information that might end up revealing the identity of the person who is reporting, whether they were anonymous or not. I think, Elizabeth, you're right. Giving more information about how the action line works, or how the reporting process works, and how we maintain anonymity if that's what they desire. But we try to communicate that it's more helpful to them if they are not anonymous, because it's easier for us to investigate. And the system that we currently use, our third-party vendor, there is a method for us to communicate with them anonymously, which is very helpful, because then we can reach back out to them and ask further questions.
But of course, they have to log into the system, right, in order for that functionality to work. So
do.
if they're sort of like I'm going to throw this out there and duck and never come back, it becomes a lot harder for you to figure out, for you to ask those really important follow-up questions.
True.
Yeah. Tiffany, what about you from your perspective? Anything that you would add to sort of Elizabeth and Tracy's? Sorry, now the Q&A is now flooding me with additional follow-up questions. So I'm gonna minimize it for a second so I can focus on what I'm saying. Tiffany, anything to add to what Elizabeth and Tracy shared there?
I think it's the right thing what Elizabeth was talking about in terms of pulling back the curtain. I don't know that yet from experience, but I know that from feedback that we've been hearing over the past few months from the field, which is because we've been exploring and trying to figure out why people have a reticence to report, or what is behind this fear of retaliation. It's an issue that we've been trying to learn more about, understand more, so that we can put a solution into place, because for the past couple of years, we've been trying to solve it and haven't. And we can tell from Ethisphere's culture survey that we do every year that this is just the one area where we've been having trouble moving the needle or making a difference year over year. Every other single thing we seem to be making progress on and going in a good direction, but this one has stumped us. And so we've spent a lot of time, like I said, over the last 6 months, really digging in and trying to understand why. And the feedback that we are hearing from many sites across the globe is the process is mysterious. We'd like to know more about it, or we think our employees need to see more about how it works. And so we have that information available to employees, but we haven't really used it in our communications. We haven't done a good job promoting it, pushing it out. It's there if they want to go look for it, but I think Elizabeth's right. And this is where we're going to be focusing over the new year over the next year to see if we can do more, to just, pull back the curtain and let people understand what happens once they do file a report.
And Tiffany, are you guys thinking right now about any changes to that communication, communication format rather, either of course, because of the current situation we all find ourselves in, or by region? Because of course, we shouldn't forget that there's likely in certain regions a cultural component piece to it, right? That's one of the things that just came in from the floor was somebody making the point that this can and often does vary pretty dramatically by region.
That's right. And that's another issue that we've been focused on. As I mentioned, we've been trying to solve this issue for a number of years without much success. And it occurred to us that we're doing a one-size-fits-all approach.
Yep.
And as we've gone out in the field to survey and find out why is this still a problem, we realized we're getting slightly different reasons or hypotheses from different countries and different sites. And so we are going to try and figure out a way to message it differently for different countries. There are cultural reasons. This is what our compliance review boards at the different sites are telling us, is that there are different cultural reasons underlying what could be giving people pause about calling into the helpline or reporting a concern to a manager. In some cultures, there may be, karma involved. In some cultures, it may just be, you don't want to harm your family or get somebody into trouble. Right. And so we want to understand what the reason is in different locations so that we can address that reason in our communications. So we do want our communications about it to be different.
And Tiffany, just sticking on that piece of it, have you guys talked at all? This was something that another idea that came in from one of the attendees. Have you guys talked at all about sharing the positive outcome of a corrective action? So let's say, hypothetically speaking, that I raise a concern that reveals that a system is causing people to is so onerous that it's causing people to work around it in a way that's contrary to policy, but they're doing it just so that they can get their job done, right? So I've heard a lot of people talking right now about the concern that employees working from home are using a lot of online communication tools that may or may not be secure, because they're just trying to get their job done, and they're trying to get it done in a way that's going to benefit the company. So no malfeasance, right? No, not somebody who's trying to pull one over on anybody, just someone who's trying to get their job done. And, it comes out during the course of the investigation there that really this is a systems failure, and there's a corrective action that is taken that has a positive outcome. Have you guys talked at all or thought at all about using those kinds of stories as part of the, hey, you helped us make it better?
Absolutely.
Concept?
Yes, absolutely. We do use those stories. In fact, we prefer those stories versus the ones that end up resulting in discipline. Those stories can be helpful as well, because you want people to know that it's worth their time to report and they make a difference. But where possible, we focus on the difference being one that doesn't involve getting somebody into trouble.
Yeah.
And so we share these stories in a number of ways. We put them up on our intranet and promote that it's there. So every quarter we share statistics from the helpline, how many reports came in, how many investigations were closed, what types of things are your colleagues reporting. So we share that kind of information, but we also share real stories. And we say these are things that really came into us, issues that were reported to us that we looked into. We anonymize, of course, to protect identities, but we do share 3 real stories every quarter. We, of course, promote that all this information and these stories are there. And then we have, in the last 6 months, started a campaign of more local messaging as well. So once a matter gets closed out, if it's something we were able to go in and remediate in a positive way, like you were just describing, we will have the site leader send a message out to the entire site or to the department and explain that, something happened and the company is so grateful that we were told about it, and the solution was put in place and now things are better. So we, rather than it coming from us, we help ghostwrite and let the site leadership send out those messages.
And I think, and Tracy, I'd be curious for your thoughts on this, but I think that diversification of the voice from whom the message is coming from is so critically important, right? Because if all the compliance and ethics messaging is only coming from the compliance and ethics team, it becomes kind of a one note song, and it's easier to tune those out. If you enable, and support leadership, particularly local managers, to do that kind of work, it becomes something that employees are going to pay a little bit more attention to, because it feels like it's coming from their universe as opposed to, the broader company as a whole. Tracy, anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I would agree with the local. We do empower local managers, and we have a compliance liaison network, and with the communications I was talking about earlier, trying to get them to tell their stories at a more local level. We haven't engaged in sort of the more widespread communication that Tiffany was talking about, and sometimes that can be difficult, because depending on the issue, we're in a highly regulated industry, and
right.
We don't want to raise more questions by putting out, just enough information to get people worried that, maybe a data breach occurred, or we violated some kind of fraud and abuse Medicare regulation or something. So that's kind of what we struggle with on examples, because we don't want all of the examples to be about harassment or
right.
HR issues. But I think using the local business teams and managers to kind of share those stories and commend employees that are acting in a compliant manner, and showing that they're, that encourages, even if you're not talking about the misconduct or corrective action, if you're commending people that are doing the right thing,
mm-hmm.
and rewarding them, I think that also raises the level of tone from the top and middle manager.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree 100%. Chelsea, if you can move us to the next slide. I want to return to this retaliation piece, because we've had a few questions that have come in from the floor around both fear of retaliation and an increased reluctance on the part of employees to report things that are happening for the benefit of the company. And I think that benefit of the company piece. So I'm not going to say anything about the fact that somebody bribed to get this contract because the company needs the revenue. That sort of approach to it. Elizabeth, I find this research that you guys did, so this is EVERFI data. I think it's so interesting as you think about manager capabilities, because that's a piece of that. The example that was provided by the attendee asking the question is an example of that short-term versus long-term vision, right? I'm not going to say anything right now, and hopefully it'll go away. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about both what this data tells you, where it came from, and some of the takeaways.
Sure. This data came from a study that EVERFI did last fall on toxic working environments. And what we meant by toxic working environments was environments with ethics challenges, with intimidation, harassment, discrimination, manipulation, those kinds of behaviors, but definitely unethical behaviors were a part of it. And what we wanted to understand is, what are the behaviors and actions that are highly correlated with toxic environments, and what are highly correlated with healthy, positive working environments, so that we could really understand what are the drivers of these kinds of unhealthy environments, and therefore how to address them. And what we found is, and this is probably not surprising when we think about our experience in the field, is that leaders and their behavior is really highly correlated with either a positive working environment or the absence of positive behaviors with a negative toxic environment or ethics problems. Not pictured on the slide, but also an important statistic is that we found that 50% of employees, and I should say the data is, we surveyed corporate leaders generally HR professionals, not the employee population. So the 50% of HR professionals or these corporate leaders said that the leaders only 50% said that the leaders in their organizations uphold the values of their organization. 50% said that they did not.
Yeah.
We found that that statistic was one of the primary drivers of a toxic working environment, a mismatch between leadership behavior and the stated values of the organization. Yeah. In addition, we looked at manager skills and manager behaviors, and we found that there's a lot of concern about managers' abilities in this area. We talked a lot about the importance of managers being the recipients of most of reports in an organization, but we found that only 66% of employees, of HR professionals, I should say, said that managers are good at listening to employee concerns. But then only 52% said that managers typically ask what they can do to help.
Yep.
And only 43% said that managers take appropriate action to address employee concerns. So while the majority of managers may be good at listening, that's sort of where the skills stop and it start falling off. And so when we think about next steps, I think this really points us to a couple of things, this data. First is we really need to continue to train our managers, upskill our managers on how to have critical conversations, how to receive reports effectively, and what they are expected to do per the organization's protocols, processes, etc. once they receive those reports to take action. And what do you want them to say to the employee who came to them and reported about what you have done, about how to pass that on to the appropriate people. To get to the 50% statistic on upholding the values of the organization, we really need to reiterate to our managers that they need to walk the talk, that we expect them to be models and to make sure their conduct is aligned with the organization, because what they do themselves can make or break the culture of a particular workplace. And in this sort of COVID environment, a lot of this work does need to be done remotely, a lot of this modeling. So in team meetings and individual conversations, managers making sure that they're modeling appropriate ethical behavior, talking openly about things that they're working through, and making sure that that is aligned with the organization's values.
Elizabeth, one of the things that I love so much about this data is it's the HR professional's perspective on exactly what our data tells us from the employee side, and the exact same impact, right? Which is a lot of managers have a hard time cultivating an attitude of gratitude for the information that the employee is bringing them, particularly when that information isn't good news, right? So how do you set aside your initial reaction, especially in this current environment where there's so much that's getting thrown at people and so much that's getting thrown at managers and so much being asked of managers? How do you really, pull those pieces together and pay attention to an employee who may very well be bringing you something? Maybe it's an easy problem to solve, maybe it's a hard problem to solve, but gosh, isn't it great that they're bringing you the problem, right? And how do you get to, gosh, isn't it great that they're bringing you the problem, when the problem may very well be the last thing that you want on your plate at the moment? So, I think it really does become that critically important conversation around that manager skill set. Chelsea, if you want to hop ahead, actually, I'm going to come back to this slide. So if you'll hop to the next one, and then we'll come back to this. Because this is the flip side of the data that Elizabeth shared, right? So Elizabeth shared the perspective of HR professionals on manager capabilities. This is data from our data set that shows the impact on the employee when the manager either does or does not discuss ethics and compliance related issues. So as you all are thinking about how do I reach my managers now, and how do I help them understand the impact that they have, this is the kind of data that can be really helpful. Particularly when you think about the fact that employees whose managers never talked about ethics and compliance related issues are 89% less likely to believe in the company's non-retaliation policy, right? That's a huge impact that managers are going to have on the employee experience. And I actually just had somebody Q&A in the question that I was going after. So thank you to whoever sent this question in. How, Tiffany and Tracy, do you think about training managers outside of the annual training and communications cycles right now in particular? What are you thinking about? What are you going to try? What are you experimenting with? What else is out there that might become an effective way to reach these folks?
Sure.
So,
I can
you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I can start. So first of all, what we're doing is we're sharing this data with our managers. You may recall that the last time we ran the culture survey with Ethisphere at our company, we got numbers very, very similar to this. This is exactly what we saw in our own population. And so we're sharing with our managers, look, there's a direct correlation here. And we saw that in our data. There is a correlation. So the managers who spend time talking about ethics, their employees are more comfortable going to them with issues, reporting concerns. And that's what we want. So we're trying to find all different channels for training managers, communicating to managers, and use those channels to convey this data because obviously people are more willing to take steps if they understand what the result is going to be, why we're asking them to do it. So one of the things that we do is during our big annual compliance awareness month that we hold every year at the company, we make a big deal about messaging this to our managers and asking them to renew their commitment to do things throughout the year where they're talking about ethics. And we provide tools throughout the year for them to do that, whether it's compliance moments that they can share in their meetings or different tools that we have to help make it easy for them. And then the second thing is just partnering closely with HR, because HR is the one at our company who oversees the manager training programs. And so we work with them to make sure that we're able to get this kind of content into the training materials for managers.
Yep. Tracy, what would you add to that?
Yeah, we're doing similar things to Tiffany. I think one of the less direct methods is trying to make sure that managers, everybody does the annual compliance training, but sometimes I think managers may not spot the compliance issues when somebody brings them something. They're just thinking about how it's affecting their operations or their team, yep, or maybe the HR component, but trying to get them to think about how this might raise a legal compliance issue as well, or a privacy issue. So just putting together those kind of toolkits and additional training for managers. We were doing some more in-person meetings, and another thing we've been trying to do from a compliance perspective is have our team members engaged in strategy teams and operations teams, have a seat at the table so that we can also be there to raise those issues and have them think about those as they're developing new products and services. And so yeah, that's just the same as Tiffany. We have been sharing the statistics from our ethical culture survey as well, because I think managers are surprised to see those numbers and aren't aware that this is even going on.
Yeah. Tracy, got a follow-up question to one of the points that you made earlier about some of the tools you've done for managers. Can you give a specific example of one of the compliance message sort of slides that you gave to managers? What was the topic or the scenario when you did your the tools that you developed for managers to use as PowerPoint slides at their own meetings?
So we try to highlight a different compliance policy each time, and we've done one on the action line, and we've done like client expenses or focusing on specific compliance issues that are relevant to their business teams.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of some of the other, yeah, go ahead.
Are you doing anything for this particular time? So, for example, have you, we got this question that came in from the floor as well for both you and Tiffany. Are there particular policies that you're promoting right now? Tracy, You also wear the Chief Privacy Officer hat. So, as you think about sort of the intersection, particularly in this time of privacy issues and compliance issues, are there particular topics that maybe weren't on the agenda to get promoted right about now, but are suddenly getting shuffled to the front of the line?
I think we've had to put out specific communications about remote, privacy in remote, in the remote work area, reminding people of things that they've always known about, keeping your documents private, not using your personal email, not using, uploading things to a personal cloud or a third-party site. So a lot of we've been doing additional privacy communications that we hadn't planned to do. And then the environmental health and safety team is also part of our compliance group, and that's a whole different set of communications that have gone out that are specific to the COVID
situation. Yeah.
We're seeing the same thing where, Erica, yes, these topics are getting shuffled to the front, and people are coming to us and asking us to please message on some of these topics. One of the big issues for us, or things that people have been concerned about, is use of social media and protecting employees' health data. We've got sites all over the globe, and there's different restrictions that are happening in these different countries right now, different requirements for businesses that are coming open or have remained open in terms of screening employees who are coming in, recording temperatures. And we've had to be very careful, of course, in every single location that we're doing what's required in this regard, but also protecting employees' personal information. We've had to message to employees, managers in particular, if you've got an employee who reports exposure, to handle that information carefully. And so this is just, in response to your question, we've gotten a lot of requests, to do communications on this topic and get reminders out to people about appropriate use of these messaging tools, appropriate steps for respecting employees' personal information, while still at the same time complying with all the requirements that we have to in each of these sites. So there are sometimes competing interests, and we just don't want to have a misstep.
Right. No, absolutely. So I know we're at the top of the hour. We've got a couple more things I wanted to cover. For those of you who do have another meeting backed up to this one, we will be sending out the recording and the slides when we're done here. So if you can hang in with us for a couple more minutes, please do. If you don't, please know that you are going to get the recording and the slides. Elizabeth, I would be remiss, particularly in this environment, if we didn't talk about retaliation in a little bit more detail. So this, of course, is EEOC data, and this is acts of retaliation that are being reported to the regulators for investigation. This isn't a trend line that I think anybody's going to be happy to see in terms of employees feeling like they have a retaliation claim and taking it to the government. So can you just talk a little bit about, especially given your background and your time at the EEOC, how do these things come in? What does this data say to you, either about employee awareness of retaliation as a potential claim, or acts of retaliation or perceived retaliation that may be happening across organizations? And what does it tell us about this time in particular?
Sure. Yeah, well, the message of this slide and this unfortunate trend line, as you noticed, is that retaliation is a really big problem. And it has been getting worse over the past 10 years plus. Both, I would say, in terms of EEOC charges, as well as, I think, data that we've seen just in internal corporate reporting as well regarding other laws and protected activity. So the challenge with this as well is that, if we can switch to the next slide, actually, is that with retaliation is that it often, one of the challenges is that companies often are not preparing for the possibility of retaliation proactively, like they do with other types of compliance issues. They often hold up a anti-retaliation policy, perhaps it's included in their annual training, there's not really the thought that we should be creating a proactive plan to prevent retaliation in the same way that we do other types of compliance planning or programming. So I wanted to put up this data point because I think it underscores the importance of being prepared. And this data comes from the Ethics and Compliance Initiative and one of their reports. And as you can see, as reported by employees, the vast majority of retaliation experienced happens within the first 3 weeks after filing a report. This is not EEOC related. This is all types of complaints, I would note. And 40% is within the first week. So the lesson that we can take away from this is that companies really don't have a lot of time to plan for how to prevent retaliation once a complaint's already been filed. We really need to have our plan in place ahead of time. So what I often recommend to the companies that I work with is a two-part plan. One is an ongoing component, which is one, making sure you're training your managers in particular on what retaliation is and what it isn't, and how do you navigate in particular performance and conduct conversations or any of those sort of complicating factors when you have someone that may have filed a complaint. Another thing that you'll want to do is, of course, continue to talk, and in many of these compliance policy highlights or communications that my colleagues have been discussing, make sure we're talking about our anti-retaliation policy and how critical that is to our workplace culture, that we encourage reporting and that we will not tolerate retaliation. Of course,
And I would add to that,
Yeah.
a critically important piece of this from the employee experience, don't talk about retaliation just as retaliation under the law, right? Like if you look at most companies' retaliation trainings, they are historically tangible employment action, in response to somebody raising a concern. If you look at what employees report as retaliation, it's incredibly, some of it's tangible employment action, right? You canceled my PTO, you took me off the good cases or the good clients, I stopped getting invited to the meetings, but a lot of it is environmental, right? Because if you think about it from the employee's perspective, you raise a concern and your antenna go up, right?
That's
and
right.
You're on the alert for anything that might be happening in the work environment that indicates to you that you're in trouble. And so, one of my favorite examples was a company who had a long-standing office move planned, and one of the employees was going to get the short stick as far as desk location, right? It was far from the windows. It was just, it was not good spacing. She raised a concern. They went ahead with the office move. And in her mind, that was retaliation, right? She wound up with the office with no windows that was farthest from the bathroom. And that was not on anybody's radar screen, right? To even think, hey, we ought to look at the office space allocation in light of the fact that she has raised this, legitimate concern. So it's also, it's about broadening the conversation with the manager too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I really like your suggestion of really putting yourself also in the employee's shoes about what things matter to them that we may not think about in terms of a tangible employment action, changing someone's schedule,
right.
Or removing telecommuting. Those are critically important and very detrimental to an employee, will likely lead to a complaint. And I would note, just from a legal perspective, increasingly due to Supreme Court precedent and others, the definition of what's legally actionable is broadening too. The EEOC cares so much about not having employers chill complaints that they're broadening their view of what is actionable to some more of these environmental factors. So definitely want to be on the lookout for that. And I think that also one other suggestion I would give, a tactic for employers here, because of this short timeline, you also want to plan for, once a complaint is filed, who is going to talk to the manager and counsel them on how to manage the employee going forward post-complaint? How will you handle performance conversations? How will you just interact with them in a way that feels like business as usual? It doesn't feel like they're getting the cold shoulder from the employee's point of view. Also consider appointing somebody to be sort of the ombudsman or the person to monitor employment actions vis-a-vis that employee going forward. So review their performance evaluations before they're issued to make sure that they don't contain improper references to the complaint or that performance actions are warranted by legitimate examples, for example. And these are all heightened, of course, in this COVID environment when people are on high alert, when layoffs may be being planned, furloughs, pay cuts, other things, as you noted, independent of their complaint. You'll want to make sure you have those double checks in place to make sure that if the person is slated for an office move or a layoff or something like that, that it's completely an independent decision process from this, and you've weighed the risks of doing that.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Chelsea, if we move to the next slide, this is from, again, our culture data set, and this is current as of, let's see, we finished this deck, today's Wednesday, we finished this deck on Monday. So this is current as of Monday. 28% of the employees who, in our data set, who indicated they had observed something, said that what they observed was retaliation or intimidation related activity, which puts it in the top 5 across the data set. For a lot of companies, it's actually in the top 3, right around harassment, discrimination, and bullying are usually right up there in the top of the charts in terms of observed misconduct. So it's definitely something to think long and hard about. So just final sort of parting thoughts, and then we'll let everybody get on with their Wednesday. Tiffany, you've mentioned a lot the partnership between HR and compliance. Any last thoughts on how to think about that, particularly now in the current environment, whether you're thinking about return to work schedules or you're thinking about how to reach managers? Any parting thoughts on kind of how to think about that partnership, nurture that partnership, and particularly who's on first with the overlap of concerns from employees about whether or not it's safe to go back to the office?
Yeah, so our approach is just going to be there for HR, to support them. At least at our company, they're on the front lines in terms of planning and organizing return to site. We'll be there to help with that. We'll be there to help message, to resolve concerns and so forth. And, you know, I think the other thing that we want to keep in mind, both compliance and HR, just touching on this retaliation theme that you were discussing, is as return to site happens, which is likely to be kind of a slow and rolling process, I would imagine, as everybody gets used to the new normal and we have to maintain social distancing and reduced on-site workforces for probably an extended period of time. We're going to have to be careful in policy making, I think, and be very attuned to this expanded set of retaliation possibilities. For example, how do you make sure that people who are employees who are working offsite or remotely are not being left out, not being afforded opportunities to work on projects, not included in decisions? And so it's this idea of, you know, equal opportunity, fairness between the employees who are back at the site, working on site, and those who are still working remotely. So I think it's just a new area. Certainly there are companies with remote workforces who have, you know, probably already thought through all these issues and maybe can help the rest of us navigate this and figure it out. But I'm expecting that to be a new area for many of us, and one where compliance and HR are going to have to remain really tightly integrated.
Yeah. Tracy, I know we've got just a couple minutes left where we have the benefit of your thoughts, so I'm going to have you go next, and then I'll say my thank you to you and let you get to your next meeting.
So it is a partnership, but it also involves very many other groups. We have a crisis management team that's looking at all aspects, and that includes facilities and IT and security and legal, and because there's so many components to the return to work and how those decisions tie into employees' feeling of engagement and understanding of their compliance and ethics responsibilities and how the company is handling those. I think it's a group activity at this point. But yes, we are playing a supporting role as well.
Elizabeth, I'll give you the last word.
I was just nodding along in a strong agreement with my colleagues here. I think, as we go to return to work, we really do need to think about um, bringing together the best thinking about how to bring people back safely, how to ensure that we have equity of access and opportunity, that our new social distancing doesn't inevitably raise additional risks, like additional risks of harassment. I just wanted to flag that
Yep.
Remote work environment or isolated employees are at increased risk of harassment because people think no one's watching. And so all of these things, we really need to be working together to ensure that our employees are safe. We're providing them with a safe working environment, both physically and psychologically safe.
Wonderful. Thank you. So thank you to everybody who hung in with us. Chelsea, just because it makes me laugh, if you'll go ahead and pop my last slide. Our data, there's one takeaway that you all walk away from today's conversation with. It's that managers really do matter. And it is, if you are thinking, particularly in this time, about where do I put my limited resources and the time I have available to me, you will have a greater employee impact if you focus on your managers, and particularly on helping them be prepared to be the leaders that we need them all to be. So thank you all for taking some time to spend on your Wednesday with us. Thank you to my panel, Elizabeth, Tracy, Tiffany, thank you for powering through all of your internet issues and at least figuring out how to get the audio working so that we could hear your thoughts as part of the conversation. Anybody who's interested in the work that Ethisphere does around culture, we issued a 3-part series of reports at the end of the year. You can find all of those on our website. Would love to hear any additional thoughts or questions that you have on all of these important points as we think about what this tells us about what the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months are going to look like. So be well, everybody, stay well, and we'll talk to you all soon.